Politically, it was quite interesting too, because Llewellyn sort of buggered up the application for federal funding around that time. I just interviewed Peg Putt, who was very critical of the way that Bacon and Llewellyn just didn't take it seriously, and the application for federal funding under the NHT, it was basically just an email saying, "Oh, we'd like some money." They didn't actually go through the proper process, and the Greens just could not believe that they'd be so flippant. And at the same time, money was being diverted out of other areas in the department to go into the Foxes, and sort of no one was happy. Basically.
No, still aren't. And no, I'd heard that there was a bit of a fumble with the first application, and people say, "Oh, I thought obviously attachment didn't get there." I don't know. It doesn't matter. It wasn't done slickly. Sometimes that's someone else thinking someone else is doing it. But
there's also emergency money, which the Treasurer's Reserve, I think, the Greens were campaigning that they should have been dipping into just to keep things going. But anyway.
Yes, also when those sorts of things happen, and particularly when there's an ask for federal help, the federal authorities are usually pretty sensible in my experience, but they are often pretty sceptical too, because all the states are always thinking of how can we get more money. And I did hear an informal flippant comment from the feds that, see, Tassie's come up with a novel way to get money. So that scepticism about foxes in Tasmania came up very early on, which was a great pity. I don't think it had any effect, but it was kind of a pity because it was against the flavour of all of the documentation and the threat abatement plans and everything else written, where Tasmania just keeps all roads lead to Tasmania as a place to protect. So I'm not sure the feds took it that seriously early on, and there was a fair bit of argy-bargy between the feds and Tasmania anyway, and things like this are fantastic hot potatoes to throw back and forth. I think Llewellyn was in dispute with his federal counterparts over a number of issues at the time, and that wouldn't have helped. And I don't know, maybe pride on whose part, I don't know. Maybe pride got in the way of making the right grovelling approach to get some success. But and the feds are also quite used to what's called cost switching, with money given for one project being used for something else. And they periodically get a bit sick of that, understandably. And Tasmania's had a bit of a record for that. And so I can understand them thinking, "Oh God, here we go again," sort of thing. But on such an important issue, it's a bit alarming to see any of that wariness there, because that's exactly when you needed people to step forward and say, "Well, what is going on?" And to have expert advice from outside the state, essentially independent expert advice, not taken seriously, is a worry. But
at the centre of that advice was the 2 to 3 year sort of time gap where this thing could be contained.
Yes,
and that
was internal. That's common sense as well. Tim Bloomfield used to harp on about that, and it's obvious. You get it. You have an opportunity when there's a bit of chaos in your species that's trying to establish, and you've got a chance to knock it off. You might be able to maintain that chaos with baiting indefinitely. But as soon as you back off, things will start moving again. That's the history of this vertebrate pest control. Is you can maintain social disruption by intense persecution, be it baiting or shooting or whatever. But as soon as you back off, that population will reorganise and get momentum again. And you can't bait forever. That's a long-term control like the mainland Australia. That's a completely different thing to an attempting to eradicate. And I think generally Australians, inexperienced, we're very good at controlling species, but really inexperienced at eradicating things. And I think that tells, because pretty well everything beyond the first few weeks of emergency, where everyone was gun-toting, so to speak, once that settled down a bit, immediately people were thinking of a scale of operating that was more akin to a control operation, not eradication. We didn't even have the cat eradication on Macquarie Island up our sleeve as some positive experience. There was almost no record of eradication. to lean on. And I think that that inexperience and naivety was also problematic. The reality is that so much more resources than even Tim Bloomfield was probably thinking of were probably required, particularly to survey the wider landscape to see are we completely overlooking something over here, which is ultimately what defeats those exercises when you actually miss stuff and then walk away congratulating yourself, and you don't get to have another go at it. And that worry extends into the current situation where a lot of people now are sceptical, but a lot of people are sceptical of the techniques, not just being cynical about the whole thing, and saying, how can you hope to eradicate a species that's as widespread as your evidence suggests just doing this? And yes, that's a genuine concern, and everybody doing it is concerned. But what else do you do? That's, to me, where all of these arguments progress to, is the effectiveness of what you're doing, not whether you should be doing it or not. And the effectiveness is very much affected by how quickly you can hit the ground running. I mean, we had to go through some very bureaucratic applications to be able to fox bait, use baits for that, and that was expedited, but it still took time and all the rest. We a lot of the research I was doing in the early days to try and find the best way to bait, and if we were baiting, to reassure ourselves that it was tolerably safe for native species. We really should have had all of that work done decades ago. It all could have been done decades ago. We relied probably too much on the mainland, although it hasn't. Mainland experience has been borne out here, and that we don't seem to have had any catastrophic deaths of anything, and a remarkable low incidence of dog deaths, like extraordinary, and that's really just due to the diligence and fear of people of killing dogs.
We'll just get back onto the timeline. The next thing was the Bosworth, the shooting of the fox on Simmons Plains. One of the things which...
Oh no, the next one was the Longford clowns there.
Ah, right, I was going to skip over the hoax, the photo.
Yes, well...
Apparently one of them is Bosworth, according to some people. But
oh, I don't know. Some people look at the photo and say, oh, I know who that is, and oh, I know that gun and all that, but I'm not party to that.
Peter Dark said he knew who it was. He gave me a name, but he's dead now, apparently, the guy, the bigger guy.
Wouldn't surprise me. They're probably locals. How that came to light was we were flying out on our very first trip to go to Phillip Island to get some fox experience. My brother Peter Mooney was the head of the ICS at the time, the temporary head. There was 8 or 9 of us or something. And the paper that morning had the photo as we were going to the airport. Oh, great. So we just said, oh, well, there was a few people we could direct to checking it out, and we kept on with doing that. Then my brother got a series of anonymous phone calls and about getting the skin. We can give you the skin. What about the rest of it? Oh, we scanned it and lost it, or whatever it was. There's records of that. And then we got a skin in the mail, half-rotten skin with a bullet hole through it. Glenn Atkinson tried to make sense of the bullet hole versus the gun that was in the picture, and that sort of thing. And that skin's still in the museum. But of course, who knows? That skin could have been from any fox anywhere. And but the appendum to that was a letter, purportedly from one of these people, saying, "I know you don't think it's true, but it really is true. I swear, black and blue, it all happened." And the story was, from memory, they were poaching on a place early one morning and saw the fox, and actually went back the next day poaching again and shot it really early. And that's why the letter explained, or the guy told my brother, and in his anonymous call, they didn't want to be identified because they were actually trespassing when it all happened. And we got a couple of opinions on the DNA work between that and a fox recovered only a little bit later, some months later, by Bosworth. That was just different opinions on the DNA relationship.
That wasn't conclusive though. Well,
No,
it was stated
no,
at the time that they were related.
Yeah, the first one. Well, they're all related. They're all cousins.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, they've said that the two
that's
were
what.
quite correct.
Yes, the first result was a bit optimistic, a bit strong, and the second result was less strong. I think everybody was hoping that somehow these were all foxes from the same litter, so we, one by one, the litters being knocked off, one way or another. I mean, talk about wishful thinking, and there were people at the time who said, "Oh, just think of the odds of that happening. It's just not going to happen. Unless these were tame foxes going to people, you'd never get them," which is much truer. But people were just. I can remember discussions, people thinking ahead to where we are now, the horror story of having to deal with this issue as it gradually expanded over the years. No good news whatsoever in it. So I guess that produces this wishful thinking, and that might have affected senior management and even politics. One option is a horrible slide, which we may be in now, and but if we get lucky, maybe that won't happen, and people go for the people are gamblers. Everyone is, and they go for the lucky break. So after that happened, and that was all of that happened really only over a week or two. Then the Bosworth incident happened. By that stage, we had Chris Ems on as the task force had sort of consolidated, and he was his title was investigations officer, but he was also, I think, heading up. He was the incident controller, if it was still called that. He was, anyway, the investigations officer. He had done the policing course, so he was authorised officer, so to speak. So he did all the interviews and all the rest of it, and he's a bright lad. He was keeping the database going. He's a bit of a computer buff, and he was the one that had the main things to do with Bosworth, the interviews. He also got the carcass off Bosworth, or Bosworth brought it to him. Bosworth showed him where it was, and it wasn't until some weeks after all that I never saw that animal outside the freezer, so to speak. I was not involved early on at all, and there was a little, myself and some of my colleagues were a little bit uneasy that we weren't involved, but I think there was just a slight demarcation encouraged by the split and senior management. So don't deal with those guys there in Hobart, we'll deal with this up north. That was that sort of thing. Although personally we had really good relationships, it was just never smooth because this, what was a very close-knit organisation, Parks and Wildlife, had been split up, and that split does have impacts. And so so I never had anything to do with Bosworth. I was there once when he was being talked to and just overhearing the conversation, but I wasn't, I'd never interviewed him or anything, and I was very deliberate in not making contact out of school like that, because the last thing you need is to complicate those investigations with too many personalities. However much curious I am, I did go to the spot, look at the distances and try to reconstruct the story as much as I could, and it all made sense. Even the taking a shot at something and not going to have a look at whether you hit or not is perfectly normal in Tasmanian spotlight shooting.
So being that far away from it, through a scope, I know we've talked about this before, it would have been pretty clear what it was. I mean, I'm just in my mind reconstructing about how the distances.
Yes, no, it depends on the light. I've done a lot of spotlighting surveys and that, and it can be amazing how hard you have to look at something sometimes, and it's really only 20 metres away. Is that a Bennett's wallaby or a Rufus wallaby or something? Even if it's looking at you, sometimes colleagues will have arguments in the car, and that should be a given, and people might think, oh, you can tell at 100 metres. Well, that's not always the case. But I'm trying to remember, he flicked the light round, saw the flash of lights, and as he shot, the animal's head turned. Anyway, I was shown the x-rays and later the carcass frozen, and I noticed the jaw was broken. And I said, what's with the jaw? And someone made the comment, oh, clearly devils that had a chew on it. Well, I knew devils well enough to know they don't break a jaw, they would eat a fleshy part. People just misunderstanding devils there. And then clearly as we looked at it harder, you could see dust from lead where there was clearly a bit of a bounce a ricochet in the animal. You know, a high velocity bullet hits bone. That's what happens. And I was given by Chris Ems a container with some feathers, a reptile scale, some seeds, that sort of thing, from the gut. He sent the mammal stuff off to Hans Brunner for identification. Gave me, didn't need to know a bird guy, knew I'd have the contacts, and I sent the bird stuff off to Dick Shoddy in Canberra at the Australian National Museum for his opinion. I had a look at it and decided what I thought it was and asked him for an opinion. And so we came back with probable IDs and that stuff, and the lizard, it was just the tip of a lizard tail, and we were told we'd have to DNA sequence all the reptiles in Tasmania and Victoria to figure it out. So, and that didn't seem to be an issue because the long-tail mouse, the Pseudomys higginsii, came back as an ID from Brunner. And in fact, you know, so I got this information piecemeal, and my brother rang me up to say, oh, we got an endemic mouse from the gut of this fox. So I was never party to the in-betweens. It was more the sending on information, sending it back, just as a conduit.
It was very informal the way that was done from what I've seen. There was only like it was sent to Hans to see what it was, and he wrote back just a scribbled note.
Yeah, yeah, in fact it was.
And that didn't...
Well, I wasn't party to the request for him, and
he didn't even know what it was connected to.
Yeah, well, that was probably deliberate. That was probably just wanting... See, if you said this is a sample from Tasmania, he might only come up with Tasmanian animals. You know, those errors happen. So it's quite proper to send someone blind. So my technique with looking at footprints was to get them scanned, and I would send them through third parties to other experts. So someone didn't get an email from someone they knew in Tasmania with a footprint to identify.
Sure.
So we actually got some footprints back identified as armadillo and things like this, because the person doing the identifying didn't know where in the world they came from. So they actually, that would be very interesting cross-examination in court. Is the effect of knowing where a sample comes from. And when people send me photos of footprints or animals or anything, if I get a chance, I say, don't tell me where it's from, I don't want to know, and I've got stuff wrong. Especially when there's not a scale in, you can I misidentified a snow leopard as a cat, you know, because it was sent by a Tasmanian, and I wasn't, but he'd been overseas. Yeah. So it's useful not to tell people, but probably part of that package of not telling him was he just treated it as a sample, a normal sample. And he may, I don't know, I asked Chris, did you ask him to keep it? Where is it? And it was sent back. And I'm pretty sure Chris said, no, I didn't ask him to keep it, or he chucked it out. When he rang back, Chris said he rang him and said, oh, can we have it back? He says, oh no, I've chucked it. No getting it back once it's chucked. But that was... have you talked to Chris M, or was it?
No, he didn't want to talk.
No, probably not. Yeah. He's someone who just does that job, moves on.
He was quite nice about it all. Yeah,
he can be very German. Yes.
One question that Graham Hall had about that one was whether its age and origin could be determined, something to do with fly larvae on the rotting corpse. I didn't quite understand that.
No, that can be done. How long the corpse has been there, there's a window of opportunity. If something's got to get putrid before flies lay eggs, and they take a certain amount of time to hatch through larvae stages and all the rest. So let's say you had a blowfly larvae of a certain species there, and it's that big. And let's say an entomologist, an expert on blowfly larvae, could say, yes, that's 2 weeks old. Well, it means it's been there 2 weeks plus a couple of days to get rotten or whatever. From memory, that wasn't done. I think, I don't know, looking at the carcass, and I'm pretty familiar with stuff. I've had an awful lot of rotting animals around my place over the years, and it looked within the range of the frozen carcass, looked within the range. I can't remember maggots or anything on it, but it was, clearly been dead a week or 3 sort of thing.
So sort of, what Bosworth was...
Sorry?
What Bosworth had said pretty
much. Was in the zone. It was totally plausible.
Yeah.
And the Bill Shoddy Dick Shoddy from memory identified a golden whistler, which is a migratory species, but this was early September and they back by early September, so that wasn't an aberration. There was nothing in it an aberration at all.
What about the actual spot where it was shot? Because I mean, he was a pretty notorious poacher.
Yeah. Both Tim Bloomfield and I thought, well, the animal had clearly been laying in the grass. When an animal starts to rot, it loses its hair, so there was hair in the grass, and it was fox hair. So clearly it was there. Now, whether it was shot there or not is a completely different issue. Now, this guy, Bosworth, was rumoured to be shoot here and there and everywhere, including places far more likely to get a long-tailed mouse than there, although I have got a record of a long-tailed mouse from an owl pellet at Epping, which is very similar habitat. Some of those little peaks through the Midlands have a really oddly pseudo-alpine, not subalpine, but odd vegetation types on the top, because they can be very cold on top. So it's quite high there for Tasmania anyway, and you add on another few hundred feet and you can have a completely different suite of plants and animals on the top. So, meaning, we've never done a small mammal survey thorough enough to pick up everything in that area, but I've found long-tailed mice at sea level in Bruny Island up to really alpine stuff, rainforest to sedgeland. They could turn up anywhere, so that's not a problem. I agree it might have been shot somewhere else. I've always focused on, was it shot in Tasmania or not?
Yep.
To me, that's the issue. The same as, was that road killed in Tasmania or not? Was that turd laid in Tasmania or not? To me, that's the overriding issue. Whether it was there or over there, I'm not so fussy about, because to me, the whole sequence should go, if we've got foxes in Tasmania, you have to assess the whole landscape to see whether you can do anything. So in a way, we put the cart before the horse. I don't think there was any option. I don't think anyone would have entertained a statewide survey when people have imagined there were no foxes here, because why? Wishful thinking in a way. Everyone, I've been stunned how few people know of that Riverside incident in '72, and no one, I still don't know anyone who's questioned it, even those who remember. It's extraordinary. If that happened now, you imagine the scrutiny that would get. It was just so matter of fact. Even the press, oh yeah, it's a fox, big deal. Oh, extraordinary. Completely different tone. But we're a lot more aware of all sorts of things than we were those years ago. 30 years before, after all.
The next one was the Burney roadkill. Outside them.
There was an incident in amongst that.
Right.
The footprints at Longford.
Oh yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, that was an important one, because
did Tim find that?
No. That was part of a regular patrol of those areas, because there'd been a few sighting reports there, and the guys thought they spotlighted one there. And there was an incident where two of our fellows, who I won't name, had a shot against the agreed rules of engagement, and said they hit an animal they swore was a fox, and was never recovered. This was quite near, in the middle of all of this little Simmons Plain, sort of Longford area. And shortly after that, they thought they found some eyeshine at this place, so they were patrolling these huge big mud places, beautiful for finding footprints. Lots of different animals. There was a couple of dogs that used to occasionally go for walks there, chasing hares and whatever. But there was a set of footprints, 50 odd footprints, a couple of days old, because the clay had cracked slightly, and they were in a long skirt, something running hard. And so most of them were distorted, but there were 3 or 4, but one in particular that was quite clear, where the animal had gathered itself and was just, I think, walking very quickly. Anyway, the guys took a plaster cast. It was Chris Parker and Oliver Breeze, took the cast, brought it in. I remember when they brought it in, we were at Longford at the old ag station at, Cressy. What's it called? Just the Cressy ag station there. We were stationed there at the time. That was our abode, on and off. And I took all the measurements I could, and we scanned it, sent it around, and as the results came in, everybody said, "Oh, yeah, that's a fox." And So there were, and it was a very open plan, almost like a big carpet, and so it was clearly one animal running and turning and, you know, doing something. And if there weren't any clear footprints, you would go, oh, I wonder what that was. But there were. So although you had a lot of footprints, there was only a couple that were clear. And it often happens in sand, so on a beach where something's walking in really soft sand, then walks over a hard ridge, and you get, and as long as you can be sure there's no other animal interfering, you know what it was. So that was a case like that, and that, and we got the local dogs, the local guys' whippets. There was a Jack Russell that used to hang around. We footprinted them all, and none of them were remotely a match. And so the suggestion that it was some guy's whippet that lived there is just a joke. A whippet's got a very different foot, a very big. It was a big whippet there. It was, although it roamed around, it was a real killer. It was twice the size, footprint wise, and very close to then, Chris Spencer was actually living on the property, renting a house. He was the guy that had the original observation. That's why he lived. It was nearby. It was all within 5 kilometres sort of thing. And but he hadn't seen anything. But you know, why would he necessarily? And that's why I was able to get good access to what dogs are in the area, because he knew what dogs use the area. So, and it's quite easy really, because all you have to do is find the dog, call it, tempt it to walk across a patch of sand where you get a footprint. If you grab the dog and say fingerprint it, you'll get a much smaller foot than a footprint. A footprint in sand is substantially larger than the foot. And that's what's led to often these stories about a giant wolf or something, is when people actually catch it in the end, it's an ordinary wolf. And I've made that mistake many times, looking for a super big devil in an area, and found no, there aren't. It's just a big devil, and the foot somehow moves a tiny bit and makes a bigger print. So, comparing this print we'd picked up, we also we got animals to walk and get plaster casts, so it was very comparable. And I'm satisfied it was none of those dogs, and I think it was the fox. That was the opinion. Anyway, that kind of wasn't a surprise, but that was only, and we could figure out from the rain, when it was that last rain, how old the tracks were, and it was about a week after that print would have been made, about a week from memory, about a week exactly after those clowns had that one up in the front of the Examiner. So that was the next incident after then. Then came Bosworth. Then the next one would have been the 2003 one, wouldn't it? Bernie. Yeah. Yes. I thought that was handled pretty poorly. The animal lingered around being photoshot and all that sort of thing, and which compromised its post-mortem results. It was even transported to Launceston not on ice. People were just super casual with it, and you know, Brian Green, maybe understandably, whatever, he wanted to get photographed with it and all this, and those 10 minutes here and 20 there on a warm day really add to a degradation in the histology, making some decisions really hard. It doesn't affect some decisions, but it doesn't affect saying what killed the animal.
Who was actually in charge then?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure Chris Ems was still the investigations officer. I don't know, that wouldn't be hard to find. That would be on record. I can't remember.
It's just that, I mean, if it's such a serious thing and you've got such experienced people for that to be allowed to happen.
Yes, no, that was handled poorly, and I can remember being critical of that. I had nothing. Again, it was an animal I only saw when it was frozen.
Were you up there at the time?
No, I was up there just before. In fact, the night before, I drove through there like at 5 o'clock in the morning or something really early. I'd been spotlighting, doing some devil work up there. I still had 2 jobs sort of thing. And I drove through there, and I although I was coming west-east, so even if the animal was there, I probably wouldn't have seen it. It was on the other side of the road, and it was would have been dark that time of year. Well, I'm glad I wasn't the one that found it, because how suspicious would that have been, sort of thing. So I was in Hobart before I heard about it, sort of thing. And from memory, that was someone on a push bike saw it, rang up the police, who went and picked it up without even taking a photo in situ. So even the police handled it poorly, and they should have really known it was a high-profile issue in Mooney, for God's sake. So that whole thing was handled poorly until it got to the lab, where the normal, sensible things seemed to have happened there.
Until they didn't get the results of the DNA work. I remember there was a big delay. I've only read the press articles where they said that they were still waiting on the DNA, and it actually never came in.
Didn't it?
No. Well,
I think it's been done now, because the specimen was kept, and Stephen Saar's done it again, and all the rest of it. But I think
I haven't heard anything of the results, and people sort of were still waiting for it.
Yeah, sometimes that happens, and by the time you get it, it's kind of a non-event. No, I don't dispute. I've always been disappointed how long it takes to get. I too have watched too much CSI to get DNA results through. And as I've put in my evidence summaries, I used to up to the time we got lots of scats, I was keeping a detailed log of the evidence, and I would sort of describe it as best I could, put in what I thought were the problems, and therefore what I thought happened, just as a log. But then when all the DNA stuff started coming in under other people's control, like and my role was diminishing by then, I sort of lost track. So I had a good log of up to the first, say, the blood at Old Beach type time, until the DNA and scats, essentially. Then the logging of all that changed completely. The data management was very Launceston-centric. From memory, the police picked it up and got onto our guys. They would have to come down from Launceston to get it. They farted around and got photos taken, not even good photos, not just in a box, and then got taken back to Launceston. So it would have been hours sitting around at ambient, which isn't good. But I mean, I thought it was most unfortunate the photo wasn't taken in situ, because the policeman did say the blood was very fresh and it was this and that, but saying that's different to sort of knowing it. Mind you, it can't have been there for long, someone would have seen it. There was calls for anyone who might have hit it to come forward, but I think most people who hit animals probably don't even know they hit an animal, so that was no surprise. Everybody thinks if you hit an animal you'd really know, so people said, oh, that's suspicious that no one came forward. But people just are blissfully unaware sometimes. I've seen people run over animals in front of me, sort of thing, and I'm sure they didn't know that wallaby or possum was there, and they haven't twitched, their head hasn't even moved, you haven't seen their shoulders move. I once saw a woman drive over a clutch of ducks in a 4-lane highway. I'd stopped to shoo the ducks off, and this woman was driving along, and I watched her, I had eye contact with her, sort of thing. I could see her really this close, and she didn't even look at the animals. She just went straight ahead, whack through the lot of them, and she didn't even look at the rear vision mirror. Tone of the engine didn't change, brake lights, nothing. So that was no surprise to those of us who are familiar with people's antics on the road. It was a kind of disappointing. And then what happened later is one of our local fellows, Sean, I can't think of his second name. He's long gone, he left years and years ago. Someone sidled up to him at Mooney somewhere and said, oh, that fox, well, we actually bonked it on the head on the ship and chucked it over there because we didn't want you buggers running around on ships, but just thought you should know, wink nudge, and it's not the first, I'll bet you it's not the last. That was the conversation. And this fellow, our fellow, Sean, I knew quite well. He was one of the more curious guys who was always asking about wildlife, and he said that's as simple as that. And, he didn't know who it was, and the guy said, I'm a wharfie, I work on the wharf, and this is what happened. It may be true. I don't know. If you bonk something,
why would you go and make something up like that?
Well, I agree.
Yeah, what's the motivation?
The thought is it came off the ship and got run over there.
Yeah,
that's been a lot. I think it's far more likely it got tapped on the head on the ship, as the guy said. But people, there's this syndrome in people that makes people want to tell you things. They want to be part of the action. It's a social animal, and police utterly rely on it. You know, a detective once told me, he said, if people just shut up, we'd never convict anyone. But they compelled, or even to talk to you. You know? As he said, it's amazingly easy to get people to talk about what they did. They'd be wiser off shutting up. So maybe that was just someone wanting to say something. I don't know. It'll be very interesting. Maybe one day there will be enough technology to say that was from the Melbourne population or not. It would be lovely to be able to do that, and that's kind of what was so disappointing about not getting a scat from that original one on the ship. You know, having found a couple of turds in the corner under, a stairway or something, because that might have one day told us a bit more about the origins, and the origins are important. But Melbourne might have been just a transit point. You know, but most all that stuff loaded on the ship comes from somewhere else. It actually doesn't come from Melbourne. It's just a loading and unloading spot. Yeah.
The next one was Lillico Beach, the one that
was
there for quite a while.
That was badly handled, but not necessarily by us this time. That incident, it was Christmas Eve or Boxing Day, and me trying to find out what happened, because by this time there was, public scepticism was out there. So people like me are, could you deal with that? So I'm trying to get first-hand information there, so I have some confidence in where to pitch an argument. And that was a period when volunteers do, Parks and Wildlife volunteers do penguin guiding, and someone attended the penguin guiding thing and said, there's a puppy run over up the road there. They didn't mention fox. I actually looked at the
was that Coombs?
Yeah, that rings a bell. Wrote down guy, puppy type killed. And so no one went and had a look. I just saw it was a dog. And until someone else, the same person, that's right. No, what happened? A bicyclist, a German woman bicyclist, rang up Parks and said, what happened with that? Did you ever find that fox on the side of the road? It's written down. The full report's somewhere. I'm just trying to remember the sequence.
She was in Canberra, I think.
Yeah, something really odd. Like she'd
been there, yeah.
And no. What happened is she'd been cycling around, saw and rang up to say, I've only just realised there aren't supposed to be foxes in Tasmania. I saw one on the side of the road up at Lillico, and that's the first time the task force heard about it, because the Parks and Wildlife thing never went anywhere because it was just reported as a puppy. That's right. And our guy went up, so this is weeks after the incident, where it was first seen, and went up and found this smeared thing in the ground and scraped it up, and the first I knew of the whole incident was someone sent me some jawbones. Chris M sent me some jawbones, says, what do you think these are? And I looked through all my mammal stuff, and because it was a juvenile and short wide jaw, it looked oddly like a mustelid, a bit like a ferret or something, and I wasn't even thinking fox. And it turned out, after sending him around here and there, and the hair analysis all sort of, they come back at the same time, oh shit, it's a fox pup. And so I went back up and looked at the spot where the guy took me to where he found it, and there was still bits of hair there, and there was a bit of an old squash penguin next to it. It looked completely different age to me, like nothing to do with it, just happened to be on the same spot. But where it was, you couldn't miss it.
That's the thing, I went to the site and I was just amazed, because especially in summer, it's the path down to the beach. You think everyone.
Well, it's
a slip road.
Yeah, well, it was on the side of the road just before the slip road.
Right. Oh, okay, so it would have been back a bit.
Yeah, but still,
were walking. Still, yeah.
Since then, what I've done is, watched a number of incidents, and Tim Bloomfield's done the same with a fresh dead fox, where he saw one fresh dead on a highway, and he's gone back and checked it to see how long it's easily recognisable. And some we found they can be unrecognisable unless you stopped and walked over and had a look within hours. You know, you look at some of the smears around here, and it can you only need just 2 trucks over it, and she's just a smear. And you see so much here, no one looks at anything. And a young fox pup, unless you got a look at the tail or something and it was smeared, could easily look like a hare or a rabbit or something like the same colour. Hares have caused me to stop many times, and the epilogue to that came years and years later when one of our dog guys happened to be talking to someone who had made a report years before about seeing 2 foxes at Lillycoat, and he said, well, I actually shot one of those foxes. I dumped it at Lillycoat so someone would find it. So there's someone, and I gave the report in camera to the parliamentary advisory thing. The guy said, I want to stay anonymous, but it was the guy who reported seeing 2 foxes on the date that it was first seen. When Sean went back to scrape it up and was having a look around, some guys were cutting the verge of the road with tractors and stopped. Oh, what are you up to? He said, oh we saw that weeks ago. He says, why didn't you fucking report it? Oh, we didn't want to get involved in all the crap, So, same story again. And the story was, this guy said he shot it. I never spoke to him. The guy who the task force guy who had spoken to him said, no, I'd rather you didn't talk to him. He was a bit nervous. So I said, can you ask him what he shot it with? And I never got an answer back to that because I had it all x-rayed and there was no lead fragments. But you're talking about an animal this big, so a bullet can go clean through. So it would have been a rifle, I think, not a shotgun. It still would have collected a bit of shot, and there was enough of it that I would have thought you'd be unlucky not to get a bit of shot if it was a shotgun, because he would have shot it quite close, I reckon. And he said there were 2 there, and he managed to shoot one, and he saw the other one again, but then never again after that. But he wouldn't say exactly where. I couldn't find out through my third party. But he said it was within a couple of miles, and my guess is the most rabbity spot you'd go shooting would be to the east of there, up along those ridges. There's a lot of rabbits there. I went for a walk along there one day and there's rabbits everywhere. But we wanted to run dogs through the colony and look for a burrow and all that stuff, but the local parks guy was very against us running dogs through the colony. So there was still a bit of, not everyone shared the mission, so to speak. There was local turf issues going everywhere, and even within the departments. That was unusual though, that someone protested, and I'm sure the guys probably did exactly what they wanted, by hook or by crook anyway. It was, and that became yet another spot to monitor, a great spot to monitor, I might add. There's some nice muddy ditches and underflows and storm water things, and plus the sand and the penguins and all that stuff. And in amongst this there were chook kills, penguin kills, all of that stuff coming in a continuous stream.
There was one that I just thought of then, where a fox was caught in a chicken pen. And
that was the one
a while back. I mean, this was back in the sort of the Longford incident.
Yes. Yeah. And got out when the guy got in the pen or something.
Was there any DNA analysis done?
No. There was the guys went and looked at the pen, scratched their balls and said ooh and oh, and took the report and went away. But I can't remember any dead chooks. Our first inquiry about getting DNA from saliva was that no, it probably can't be done. So that was one reason that was slow off the mark.
Yes, I mean, you reckon it running around there?
You think, yes, that wasn't very thorough. But in those days there was so few people and so much action. I think people were just thinking, oh, it was probably a fox, and oh, we're bound to get something else tomorrow. And yeah, it wasn't done in a very aggressive, systematic fashion, and that's drawn suspicion. But I've long since learned that most conspiracies are really just fuck ups, which is no excuse.
Coming across, yeah.
Well,
you're sort of trying to follow these theories, and they get more and more bizarre, and then you think, hang on, couldn't they just have made a mistake?
Yeah. I think that's and that might apply to a proportion of these scats. I'd be truly amazed if it was all of them, But I would still lean towards a positive foxscat coming off Bruny Island. There's some transcription error because you got this long line of things. If you think about what actually happens with all there's some writing down of grid references, there's transfer of that onto computers, all of this, there's reading it, then writing it, then typing.
23 different.
I can think of 23, and I'm sure someone else could get a bit more adventurous. And phone calls involved, and at that stage, I don't know if they're doing it now, I recommended they photograph scats before they analyse them, so at least you could compare at least you have some comparison between the field photo and the one analysed, because otherwise you've got no hope of knowing whether there was. I mean, things happen. I heard a hilarious one with blood samples some years ago. A friend of mine who was working on blood at an unnamed hospital, and they got wet. The samples were all sealed, and the labels come off. So they had like 4 or 5 blood samples and 4 or 5 labels. And oh shit, because it was their fault they got wet, and they just stuck them back on. And who would know what it was? And this person was admitting it to me when he was a junior nurse sort of thing, and that stuff can happen, and therefore you can have a genuine fox scat with the wrong label on where it came from. And I, considering the volume of material that's been dealt with now, thousands of items, it'd be amazing if those sorts of bugger-ups hadn't happened. And I have general confidence in my colleagues, as I hope they would have general confidence in me. But I would be insane if I would have said, no, that could never happen. It happens. That's why most police cases that collapses, because exactly that happened. Someone moved it out of the freezer and the label fell off. I mean, a very good example is, where as biologists are supposed to be fastidious with labelling specimens, but it drives you insane at work. My old work in the freezers, there's beautiful specimens, all beautifully packaged up, and most of them don't have labels because someone was going to come back and they're writing at the desk, and then someone rang up and they forgot to, or the label was put on with a crummy old bit of string. And when you empty out the freezers, the bottom was full of labels. And unless there was just, every label was very complete with adult something or other, you can't add them back together. That's not forensic material.
No.
But...
Well, considering what's at stake with this...
It's really... the guys, in fact, it's kind of... to me, it's quite impressive how much trouble they seem to go to in recent years with preserving integrity of scats and all the rest. But there still are a lot of steps, and there still are potential accidents, I'm
just going to drop a name in there, Ardrey Conyon.
I know who he is, but I never worked closely with him.
Yeah, he left the program under pretty strange circumstances.
Big guy, isn't he?
I haven't met him.
He was very intense, I remember that.
Yeah, well, he's made some claims about how he was told to go out and put scats in fields and not tell people where they were, and there was a bit of...
Fox scats?
Yes. And he's made these claims, and he won't go on the record or anything saying them. I was just wondering if it rang any bells and you...
No, never heard that.
He left under pretty bad circumstances. I think he might have been dismissed or...
Yeah, well, a number of people. I do remember he was, reassigned to do some section, and he refused. He didn't want to do that. He was a very independent sort of fellow. There's been a lot of staff through there, so there's the fair share of eccentrics.
Well, yeah, I mean there has been a huge staff turnover in the program.
Yeah, well, it's very wearing if you take it seriously. If you just want to be a public servant and cruise along, cool. Yeah, who cares what people say about you? But if you take it seriously, which a lump of them do, very seriously. In fact, I've usually been impressed how seriously people take it. It'd be very wearing, the continual argy-bargy and the lack of results, the lack of an end point. Particularly now it looks like it's still going on, and I'm not party to any day-to-day information that you're not, or any member of the public isn't really. I mean, if I ring up and ask about something, I'll probably get told stuff the public wouldn't, but unless I do that, I don't get any special reports. And it would be, it's a little bit soul-destroying seeing all of that effort and angst still not achieving an endpoint like that. That's the story of most pest issues, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But no, I've heard. I hadn't heard that story, and
Right.
certainly not connected to that person. But
I haven't been able to nail it down. I mean, it's one of those stories. But anyway,
no. Well, it's that dodgy. What you have to be aware that there's what we did on many occasions was I sent when Stephen Saar. These stories can get distorted. When Stephen Saar was trying to work out his multi-species test, his original ambition was, a scat comes in, I can tell you what species it's from. It proved to be too expensive, so they just did fox or not fox. I would send him in stuff I knew what it was. So if I had a spotted tail quoll in a trap and I got a turd out of the trap, I'd send him that knowing what it was, not telling him what it was, just as a blind test, which is extremely useful to do. I never did it with fox, but I did it with lots of stuff.
It has been done in the program. I've spoken to people.
I would hope so, because you need to know that. And that Chinese whispers added to layers of that. I've also, when we were trying to work out people's likelihood of finding scats in the landscape, we used put a lot of devil turds out, and to see, because when people were picking up any scats, I mean, I say, okay, they're going to do a walk around this paddock. I wonder, let's make sure there's some scats out there, and I even put microchips in them so I could check them later, that sort of thing. And so you pick them all up, they're all devil scats out of pens, I don't know what they were, they're not foxes. And if someone was asked to do that and never was fully informed of the endpoint, a couple of layers of Chinese whispers, and because you can't tell a little fox scat from a devil scat, generally speaking anyway. I don't know. I'd be extremely disappointed if that happened, but Jesus, you can verbalise a general confidence, but you can't vouch for people. And once it gets to the point where you'd have to go to court and vouch for someone, you have to be pretty careful, and you realise, Jesus, most people ultimately are capable of anything, given the right circumstances, including yourself, I might add. Well, not yourself, but anyone.
Yep.
So expressing a confidence is different for saying it can't happen or it never did.
Yeah.
It's just silly to say that.